Welcome to the next episode of Navigating Carbon, your compass to carbon management. As always, I'm your host, O'Brien, and I'm super excited to kick off the start of the new season with friend of the pod, Dan Romito. We've been off for the summer, and given everything else that has been going on in the world of energy right now, I thought who better than Dan to sit down with to set the scene as we kick off the new season. Dan and I don't always agree on everything, but the one thing that we are aligned on is figuring out how to find market solutions for decarbonization of the energy space, but still having the energy that we need in our lives. And I really appreciate Dan's no-nonsense approach to how he thinks about and analyzes the markets. As part of our conversation, we covered a lot. We started in the Middle East and the impacts of the ongoing war, as well as then the impacts locally here in the US. Got Dan's view on demand destruction, including how biofuels play into the mix. We had an ongoing discussion about the evolving data center conversation, as well as Dan's thoughts on the role of government funding associated with new and evolving technologies, including geothermal and nuclear. We finished up our discussion with an interesting talk and conversation around water, so stick around to the end to hear that. If you're interested in following Dan, he has his own pod called Petronoia, which I've linked in the show notes, and he will also be releasing another book later this year around emission reduction in the energy space. To make sure you don't miss any episodes, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. But for now, sit back and enjoy my conversation with Dan. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Navigating Carbon. I am joined again. Dan's back with Dan Romito. How are you, Dan?
Good. Thanks for having me. I was afraid. I don't know if after the first one that you'd love me back, but I'm glad that you did. This is great.
I love, we chat a lot. I see you offline as well and things, and it's always great to get a good update from you in terms of like what the hell is going on in the world right now. Before we dive, I've had a break over the summer, but it feels like things are kind of ramping up and going a little bit crazy again. I know you're sort of in the same boat, but let's just start big picture. I know we're in this like on again, off again, sort of there's all this ongoing tension in the Middle East and focused on Iran. Like curious kind of let's start there. Like seems like the best place to start.
Like anything, it's gone through this progression. It was interesting. So when it first broke out, I had a reporter, no names, but it was a prominent source. I was like, wow, like I was flattered that they would actually reach out to me, given, the prominence of the name. And they said, well, what is this going to do to oil prices? And I said, well, they're going to spike temporarily and then they're going to revert back to probably where they've been the last couple of years. Like anywhere between 75 to like 90, like somewhere in that neighborhood. Anyway, not anything crazy, right? Not anything to be like, oh my God. And the reporter took a step back and she's like, well, wait a second. Like you were literally the only one saying that. Everyone thinks we're going to like $150 oil. And it's like, no. And she was very adamant and she said, well, why do you think that? And I'm like, say what you will about Trump and you don't have to make it, I guess it's Iran, so it's quasi-political. But if Trump does anything, he looks at Twitter like a significant portion of the day and he's an 80-20 guy, right? And so the second that he sees public sentiment is beginning to get salty on oil prices and the pressure is there, he'll do something, and whatever that may be, he'll do something to bring that pressure back down. And we've seen that, right? We've seen sort of like these temporary spikes.
Yep.
Now what's frustrating is, I spent some time in San Diego, and then obviously in New York for events and conferences and whatever. And people are utilizing it, in my opinion, as an excuse for high gas prices. And I'm like, well, y'all don't really understand like what those connections are. And it's like, well, what do you mean? What hasn't gotten as much attention is the closing of refineries, right? Refineries coming offline. That is a significant problem. And then when you match it up with certain states, let's call it fiscal situation as it relates to taxing on, consumer focused products like gasoline. There's this interesting stat that they looked at. There's this town, I can't remember what it is. It's on the border of California and I think Nevada. And it's like, once again, the gas stations are separated by like 3 miles. Like it's literally on the border. and California is twice the price as Nevada. And it's like, well, case in point, guys, like it's a lot of policy that we're not discussing. So the Iran thing is now annoying to me. It's like, just get it over with, right? This should have been, in my opinion, not as long as
Yeah.
it's taken. Once again, as arrogant as it sounds, we're the United States, they're Iran, right? We can pummel them, frankly, whatever we want. But I think it's at the point now, it's like, if anything needs to calm down, it's the volatility, right, in the markets. But then that sort of plays into the whole thesis that I've been promoting the last year is everyone's talking about, we just want volatility to calm down. We want things to calm down, like all of this. And it's like, it's not going to.
No.
Like volatility is the new constant. Like you just have to accept the fact that the world that we're going to be operating in for the next decade, for a variety of different reasons, geopolitically being one of them, particularly Iran, um, we're in a new wave where volatility is just sort of the new norm.
Mm. So much to unpack in that. And I want to start with with this volatility and, your prediction that oil wouldn't go to $150 a barrel has been correct. Like you said, we've
Yeah.
been in this on again,
Yeah,
off
it felt
again.
great, man. I did get off the phone. I'm like, maybe I'm crazy and that's going to come bite me. But I was like, yeah, it felt good.
Sometimes as well, it's nice to be the contrarian in the room,
Yeah.
right? And have that, here's a different opinion and why, right? To be honest, none of us know what's going to happen. To your point, the volatility
We wouldn't be
piece
talking on
is
this podcast
crazy.
if we knew what was going to be
Yeah,
happening.
right?
Like,
Exactly.
crushing drinks on like some yacht somewhere.
Yeah, we would not be grinding away.
Right, exactly.
So in the content, and we'll talk a little bit about the refinery piece here in a sec, but I'm just kind of curious your thoughts around this, with the volatility and the up and down again, and is the Strait of Hormuz open? Is it closed? Is the broader Middle East impacted and things like that? Do you, and I know we were talking about this when I saw you in person earlier this year, but I'm curious your thoughts around demand destruction.
Yeah.
Do you think that's real? Do you think, and for people that aren't familiar with it, the idea that because the oil's not going to be available, people will use alternate things, find different things, that kind of stuff. Where do you sit on the demand destruction conversation around oil and gas?
Yeah, I mean, there's the textbook version and there's the economic reality version, right? I mean, textbook version will say when there's demand destruction, alternatives are sought after, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not to sound snarky, we don't live in a textbook, right? There's economic realities in there. And, we sort of saw this book or an adjacency of the book play out when we had the Green New Deal. The demand destruction, in my opinion, does not force the market to seek out other alternatives, right?
Why is that?
As it relates to oil and gas. And let me tell you why. Some of the constraints, whether it's on purpose or just ignorance or whatever the reason is, doesn't really matter. You have the constraint of the grid, the state of the grid in the Western world, but particularly in the United States, was built for a very specific reason. It was built for a very specific cause, to just go in and think that you're going to retrofit it overnight. You talk to anybody that is familiar with it, you're like, oh, dude, this is decades. Then you factor in the fact that our government can't get their act together and pass something, in my opinion, as simple as permit reform. So even if we could do it, we could not do it because the policy is not in place that would facilitate it. So if you have this notion where oh yeah, there won't be any oil and gas for all intents and purposes, I'm obviously staying high level, we're just going to go to this. It's no, we've had this dynamic for the last maybe close to decade where for example, the interconnection queue, the backup in the queue as it relates to solar, you have this massive backup. And it's because we haven't been able to retrofit or modernize our grid. Now, what's fascinating, and I was just on a talk with a couple people the other day, it's not creating a substitute directly for oil and gas. It's just getting more savvy with the hand that you've been dealt, the economic hand that you've been dealt. So you're beginning to see really savvy behind the meter technology or incredibly innovative thoughts with how do we institute smart cities. But what I think people are learning almost the hard way is it's not this energy story that we should be discussing. It's actually an infrastructure story that we should be discussing, right? Everyone thinks that the cloud is this intangible, dynamic, reality or capability that you just can't see, like the cloud, like it lives in the cloud. You're like, no, like the physical infrastructure
Yeah.
that you need to put in place for the cloud to work right, particularly as we learn how this hyperscale economy is going to be run, like you need a lot more stuff. So I guess the very long-winded answer to your question is, yeah, like textbook economics would tell you that, but economic reality would also say you're ignoring very significant parts of public policy.
Mm.
And then also just the regionality of what's going on, like what needs to be done in California is not necessarily what needs to be done in Texas or
Mm.
Florida or New
That makes
York,
sense.
right? There's these regional components that we're just not discussing as to
Is
the
it?
extent that we should.
I'm gonna, yeah, and like the substitution piece around demand destruction, I think there's because I think it's a really important piece to point out, right? Like substituting for electricity
Yeah,
generation, where we don't use natural gas and we use solar and
right.
geothermal and nuclear, whatever it is. To your point around infrastructure, like I completely get. I'm curious as to your thoughts on like for like kind of substitution. So like the role of biofuels, for example, like
Yeah.
as a liquid
Well,
substitute. Like what's your kind of outlook and stuff like for some of that kind of
yeah.
stuff in the US
Well,
where
how
it's
long is this show, right? So I got to figure
we
out. I got to figure. I got to figure out how to some like. I think one of the problems, and I don't think people do this on purpose. I'm certainly not implying that you're
yeah, no, that's fine.
saying this. Like people are like, well, what about this and what about that? It's not like a mutually exclusive consideration. It's everything,
Yeah.
right? I think a lot of people, there's three different things going on. Number one, I think we're evaluating the market in the context of announced or forecasted gigawatts
Mm,
as opposed to what we can actually deliver. Those are two completely different things. And if you look
they
at
really are.
how the market is pricing valuations, they're pricing it on forecasts, which is a big problem because in many ways we cannot deliver on the vast majority of what we anticipate that demand to be. That's a big problem. Number two, there's this weird dynamic going on in the market. I just did this analysis for a client, so we'll play a little bit of Jeopardy here with you. From a price to cash flow perspective, right? Price to cash flow. What is the multiple that the Magnificent Seven is trading at today?
Ooh. I don't know the answer to this, but I'm going to assume it's something like 2 or 3 times.
Well, it's 34 times. Yeah,
Holy
it's
crap.
4 times. That's the Magnificent Seven.
Yeah.
That's over, I think, like the last 12 months.
And for
All right.
folks that aren't aware of that, we're talking about like the Metas, the Googles, all the
Yeah, the
AI,
Magnificent Seven are
the data
Tesla,
AI.
Meta,
Yeah.
Amazon, Microsoft.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. The data
um,
folks,
and then, so
essentially.
what is the 5-year median? So over the last 5 years, what's the median price to cash flow on the S&P 500?
Oh, I have no idea. I
It's
should
like
know,
just under
but
16. It's like 16 times.
okay.
So the Magnificent Seven today is trading at a 230% premium
Wow.
to the 5-year median of the market. But what's interesting is like, what's the price to cash flow multiple of energy, industrials, and materials? You know,
No.
they're all between 10 and 11, right? There's this massive valuation gap. So it begs the question of like, what's going on? So my theory, my hypothesis is that everyone has this irrational euphoria on data centers, right? And that's being reflected in the
The
valuations of Met
valuation.
7. And then everyone that's more familiar with the inputs that go into data centers, materials, industrials, and energy are like, just pump the brakes here,
Yeah.
pal. Let's take the bourbon away from the party just for a second, because they're not necessarily going to be able to deliver on those promises, not because of anything related to incompetence or
Yeah.
execution, maybe a little bit, but just because of the constraints in the market of like supply chain risk. China controls the vast majority of rare earth minerals. Permit reform in the United States, volatile geopolitics, like all this other stuff where people who are less focused on the technology and more focused on the inputs have a realistic story. And
Yeah.
why I also think it's a thing to consider is you have this dynamic, like I said, 34 times price to cash flow, the Magnificent Seven, 15 times price to cash flow, the market.
Yeah. That's
That's a
huge.
230% premium. Let's say it reverts to
Yeah.
the mean slightly and goes from like 34 times to 25 times. That's still 150% premium to the market. But if when you go from 34 times to 25 times, when you extrapolate that math out, it's a loss of $6 trillion of market cap, which has a ripple effect into CapEx. So even if the market reverts and remains at 150% premium, you're still going to have a loss of $6 trillion of market cap, which equates to about, if you're just keeping simple proportions, but it's roughly $150 billion less CapEx.
Yeah.
And then, oh, by the way, we have inflation. We have, a volatile VIX, right, in the market. Like, cost of capital is not getting any cheaper. So I think we need to pump the brakes a little bit. Like, look, like you've seen my presentations. No one loves like using ChatGPT for cool memes more than me.
More than you.
Right. And I just too, like I'm using AI to create, my daughter is like creating like songs like on AI.
Yeah.
Got to mess around, like just getting lyrics and then putting the lyrics into Claude and like calibrating the voice so it kind of sounds like Ella Langley, but not so much. And it can't sound like Taylor Swift. It just takes forever. Anyway. So anyway, I love AI, but I think we're listening to the wrong people, or disproportionately listening to the wrong people, because everyone is so caught up in the multiples of the Magnificent Seven. They're not necessarily looking at the multiples that are going on in the critical inputs, materials, industrials, and energy that make the AI world tick anyway.
Yeah. And like reflecting on, like 12 months ago when you and I had this conversation, like it felt like data centers were the new darling. Everyone was super excited. To your point, the forecasts and the projections on electricity use because of AI and data centers was out of control. But, all the gas companies were like, we can help. And that's where, like you said, some of the behind the metering kind of conversations and things like that started coming from. Like, do you think this gap between, and from what you've said, there's a couple of gaps, right? There's this gap between just physical supply and demand of like, how do you actually get it there? But like potentially a capital gap as well in terms of how do you actually pay for any of this stuff to go in the ground and stuff? At what point do you think the rubber will meet the road and we'll actually see some of I feel like we're already starting to see data centers falling off those projections and stuff from everything that was planned and stuff. Like, at what point do you think the reality piece will catch up? Like, will it? I don't know.
Well, Sergey, like, not to sound corny, but like in the interest of three is like, I'll break it down. The first and foremost thing is like, I've seen the movie. My wife loves the movie. Aaron Brockovich sort of entering the data center movement, if you will, is a really significant inflection point. Because Miss Brockovich brings up a variety of good points, and she brings awareness to, hey, a lot of these communities aren't really cool with what's going on in the data center community. And as that traction picks up, other communities are going to see that. And they're like, I don't want that here. And there's, I was in Kentucky giving a speech. And it was literally a day after like a nice little lady farmer where the farm was in the family for like generations told, I think it was like Facebook or Google, it doesn't matter who it was. She told the tech pros to take a hike. She's like, I don't want $40 million. Like get lost. That's picking up steam. I think the other component is that, when you're talking about capital discipline, we've sort of seen this story before with the shale days. And I'm not saying there's a direct overlap with shale, but I'm releasing this next week. There's some really interesting parallels on that. Like, we went back and looked at like earnings notes and analyst notes and earnings calls, was ironically using AI.
That's okay. It's a great tool, right?
Like, the efficiency. Like, I'm not going to read all these things.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that would take you so long to troll through.
Yeah,
like,
I read some of them. Like, some of them were interesting.
Yeah.
But if you sort of like played the Mad Libs game and you just took whiteout and you white out shale and you put in data center, it's like, we're excited about this growth, like unprecedented growth. Like, look at these forecasts, like all this stuff. Like, there are some very like eerily close parallels. And then you saw how that resulted. And once again, I'm not saying that we're gonna light $1 trillion on fire like we did, with the shale days. But I think investors are like, wait a second, at some point in the not too distant future, we're going to have to start earning a return on this stuff, right? We're going to have to start earning a return. And, back to the comment of my crystal ball is as good as yours. I don't know when that timing is, but at some point that bill is going to come
Yeah.
due, and there's going to be a lag or underperformance of ROI, and then everyone's going to be like, yeah, capital discipline. It's like, anyway,
It's a really good, and for those that are familiar with kind of the last decade of, and it was probably 15 years now at this point, of what
it's
happened
closer to
in
20, as
the
depressing as that is.
yeah, like if I go back, I've actually realized I've been in the US longer than I've been here,
Yeah.
well over a decade at this point. But it is a really good analogy in terms of, in the early days of unconventional and shale development that, like everybody was out raising as much money as they could from
Right.
anyone who had any assets and
Yeah.
said the word shale or unconventional.
Yeah.
And to your point, drilled everything, whether or not they should have. And
Right.
it didn't return. And, there's price volatility that played into that as well. But we'll see that on the commodity side, because you talked about,
Yeah.
with the data center piece, because if gas prices continue to go up and the cost of running a data center
Right.
continues to go up, it'll be no different. Like, it's a really good analogy in that regard, but it'll be interesting to your point, like if we can actually step back and learn from that so that we don't waste all this capital in the first place. That'd be
Well,
nice, but
the,
like, I
the
don't know.
proverbial rub too is like, the interdependency of national security, economic prowess. I would put stability, like regional stability in there, right? Because of the tax base and sort of
Mm,
the employment. I don't actually know the resulting numbers. Maybe the jury's not out yet because it's still a little bit too soon. But, um, you take into account those other factors. It'll be interesting to see what the balance is. Like, I am a big fan, or I believe in the argument that data centers and the ability to harness AI and the corresponding data, right? Data is the new oil, the new black gold, whatever you want to,
yep.
stupid analogy you want to call it or use. Um, it does impact the balance of power for the next century at least. So you can't just say we're not going to have any data centers, and then you can't say, well, like, let's just go data center or bust, which is exactly the conceptual argument with oil and gas. Like, you
Hmm.
can't just say no oil and gas, and you can't just say, like, drill, baby, drill, and let's just blow stuff up whenever we want. And of course, no one
Yep.
says that, but like, that's the
They used
perceived.
to. Like,
Yeah,
so,
exactly. And
yeah.
what sort of made the balance work was capital discipline,
Yeah.
right? When corporates were sort of roped back in and the punch bowl was taken away from the party, and they said, no more capital for any of y'all until you showcase return. That was sort of
Yeah.
like the equalizing factor of what sort of created what the equilibrium is. And then it also fostered this opening for these other technologies to emerge. Now, the frustration with that is I believe that it's policy that's holding it back, right? I wish people would just break off from their tribal political tribes, and say, like, what's awesome? Like nuclear. What's awesome? Geothermal.
Yeah.
What's badass? Like battery storage. Like, we could do that. And for whatever reason, we aren't. It's
Yeah.
irritating.
Yeah, and again, so much in there with that. Like, I I agree. Like, we do get caught up in this conversations around good and bad of all of this
Yeah.
stuff. And to your point, like, you and I come from very different sides of some. We're both from oil and gas, but
Right.
we've disagreed on lots of different things. But there's a lot that we agree on, and I think the piece around the capital for me is actually a really really good piece
Yeah.
generally, because
Mhm.
irrespective of policy, irrespective of politics, irrespective of public sentiment.
Yeah.
And again, we shouldn't just disregard the public, and we can
Yeah.
talk about lessons learned or lack of lessons learned from unconventional
Yeah.
development, from coal, from nuclear, whatever it is. But like, if it all goes back down to economics
Yeah.
and the market, like, people will make not different
You're, you're,
decisions,
tr-
but
you're,
they'll
you're
make proper
triggering me.
decisions that make
You're triggering
sense,
me.
right? Yeah.
No,
Like,
so I
it's,
mean, gratuitous plug here, unsolicited gratuitous plug. I apologize. Like, this is the book. I'm releasing a book on this at
fabulous.
the end of the year. It's called The Fixable Planet. Like,
Yeah.
the argument of the book is that climate change is a thing, and climate change should be evaluated and addressed, and in some cases, provided solutions. But we're not going to get there if we continue on this path that climate change is this morality war. Like, it's not. and it goes back and it historically looks at a couple different like natural disasters. The most prominent one being the hurricane of Galveston in 1900, where the city was just wiped out.
Hmm.
And then like I did without AI, I did take the time to look at like newspaper clippings and sort of
Hmm.
like the tone of the era. No one was like pointing fingers and they're like, this is, climate change. Now, once again, fair, different world. But it was fascinating how they were like, look, we are rebuilding the city. Like we're not allowing it to just be decimated and we're all walking away.
Yeah.
We are rebuilding this and here's how we're going to do it. And what's crazy is like, they didn't even have penicillin. There were no TVs. They didn't have automobiles. They didn't have like really sophisticated tools. They had no like logistical advantages. Like,
Yeah, like it was 1900s. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. It's like, I mean, in some cases, like there's stories about how when they were raising the city, they forgot to build like bathrooms. So like workers had to like go down to the ocean, do their thing, and then go back to work. And they're like, yeah, we probably should have built bathrooms. Like small
Whoops.
stupid stuff like that. And anyway, so like the central premise of the book showcases like you can't have solutions, functional solutions, and technological innovations unless you have sound economic policy,
Hmm.
right? You have to have policy in place where capital is attracted to quality investments that facilitate return so that investors get their money back so that they can give you more money,
Yeah.
right? And then if you're going to rely on the government for it, number one, the government sucks at basically everything and it's littered with bureaucratic incompetence who are just more interested in self-preservation. I get it. We can have that conversation later. But there is a very small accountability infrastructure relative to capital, right? Capital is everything. The capital markets is everything that's great about the United States. I'm going to give you money and I'm going to hold you accountable. And if
Hmm.
you aren't accountable, there are consequences. And you just don't have that. And oh, by the way, like there's a snowball effect in a good way. The reason that, NVIDIA is $3-4 trillion of market cap is because they continually gave their investors a return, which attracted more investors, which provided more capital.
Hmm.
The opposite of that is if you just tax your citizens into oblivion, number one, like at some point they just can't pay that tax. Number two, they're going to move and say like, I'm sick of paying taxes. And we've seen that play out over the last 5 years. And number three, there's just not the efficiency in any of these government bureaucracies that there is with the capital markets, like
Yeah.
that accountability infrastructure. So anyway, long-winded point once again is
No,
that
it's
if you
great.
want to solve these very complex issues, you can't view them through the lens of like morality. Like you can evaluate them somewhat, but it can't be like this moral binary, which is like you're a scumbag or like you're a saint. Like it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And then number two, you have to install an accountability infrastructure that would facilitate access to broadening capital, which, it's not a perfect system, but it's the best one that we have
Yeah.
available.
So I'm curious on the capital base and like the role of government. Where
Yeah.
do you come down around, new technologies? And like
Yeah.
there's often a lot of government support that goes into new technologies, whether
Yeah.
it's whether it was like unconventional shale development, whether it's
Yeah.
solar panels, now we're seeing it around like geothermal that DOE's been putting out a lot of grants and things like
Yeah.
that. Like where do you, and actually DOE's got some grants out around like
Yeah.
optimizing hydraulic fracturing and stuff right now.
Right.
Like where do you come down in that piece in terms of like how do we
Yeah.
scale things to get them to a capital market so that then that can play out? I don't know, I'm
Yeah. So
curious.
first and foremost, like under the context that basically, with the exception of very few things, but generally speaking, government is ineffective and they stink at everything. And once again, why do they stink? It's because it's littered with bureaucrats and lawyers. Like, I don't know if there's any, but even if there are, there's very few engineers, finance, scientists. Like, you could probably name them on, one or two hands. Like, it's just overwhelmingly
Lawyers.
underrepresented from a
It's just,
diverse set
yeah.
of skill sets. And so like, I used to, well, I still do, but like when you talk to politicians, um, they don't understand, and to expect them to understand, like, I don't understand some of this stuff and I've been doing it for like 20 years and still I'm like, learning like, oh, I didn't know that. Like, can you imagine if I didn't do this for a living and then just come into the energy or the power or the technology world and like all of a sudden you're an expert. You're like, No, it doesn't
Yeah.
work like
Doesn't
that.
work that way. Yeah.
I love the idea of grants, right? But it has to be like the same diligence that an investor would place on a prospective investment within their portfolio company. So what DOE and what Chris is doing with these grants, it's like, okay, like working bottom up almost. It's like, what do we need to accomplish? All right, we need more power. Like, okay, what are our available options? Well, it's pretty much natural gas and coal and maybe a smidge of like wind and solar there. It's like, all right, what are the deficiencies with that? Where are the vulnerabilities? Okay. How do we fill in those vulnerabilities? Like, and the three major vulnerabilities are affordability, reliability, and lowest carbon molecule. So if you can come to me and say reliability, check, affordability, check, lowest carbon intense, check, you can win in a
Mm.
competitive environment some grant money to establish proven concept. And then once you have proven concept, it's up to you to go to the private or the public markets,
Yeah.
say,
Mm.
here's my business case, here we do it. Now, when you have proven concept, right? I don't have a problem with the government helping you scale. Like nuclear would be a great
Yeah.
example.
It's a
Like there's
good
not too many
example of that.
balance sheets around where they're like, yeah, let's leverage the entirety of our balance sheets to scale nuclear for the
Yeah.
betterment of society. Like maybe I'm cynical, but if it's a subsidy to keep a dying business afloat,
No,
no.
no.
Like we have the notion that you would allow taxpayer money to float a dying business is so egregiously offensive to me, like to the point where like my blood is boiling right now.
Is this the
So what
coal conversation a
the
little
coal
bit?
conversation, yeah, like it's the coal conversation, exactly.
Yeah.
But so, if the government would implement the same rigor and diligence that a conventional institutional investor would place on a potential investment within their portfolio, and that came in the form of the grant with the expectation, I mean, that's your startup capital.
Yeah.
It even puts skin in the game, right? If you don't do this, you owe X, right? It's
Yeah.
not free money. Like there's countless examples, whether it's the financial crisis or like the housing stuff, like conversation the other day, free money is not good.
Yeah.
Like it's good to receive.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But it makes us lazy to a certain
Yeah, it
extent.
makes us lazy. It
Yeah.
decreases diligence. It decreases competition. It doesn't hold people accountable. Like, knock it off. So I don't like subsidy. I don't have a problem with grants. And then if you can prove that it's a functional technology that really doesn't have access to quality capital at scale, like nuclear,
Yeah.
fine. Like, go for it.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it's going to be a tough argument for me to
Yeah.
swallow.
No, that makes sense. The coal conversation of like insisting that we've got to keep these coal-fired plants open, to me, it makes no sense either. When there is, to your point, there is other options, but that's where the money could be funneled, and there is some money being funneled into things like geothermal and nuclear. So
Yeah.
let's pivot to that for a little bit. Like I'm curious.
Okay.
Like I feel like last year we heard a lot about nuclear,
Yeah.
both out of the DOE and like generally in the energy space.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because I like disappeared for the summer and put my head in the sand a little bit, which was actually
Yeah.
needed, and I
Which
had
is
a great time.
as needed. Yeah. I
Need to
got you.
do these things, but like I'm curious as to your current outlook and thoughts around both nuclear and geothermal.
Yeah.
I'm starting to
I've
hear a
always
little
been a
bit
fan
more
of
about,
geothermal. I've
well,
always been a fan of
just in
nuclear.
terms, I guess the current. I know you're a fan of them, but I guess just in terms of the current status, like I
Yeah.
feel like I'm starting to hear a little bit more around companies starting to assess geothermal
Yeah.
opportunities. Fervo, for those that aren't familiar,
Yeah.
one of the sort of pioneering kind of geothermal
Right.
companies. I think IPO'd pretty
Yeah.
recently as well. So like we are seeing some traction in that space.
Mhm.
I'm just kind of curious as to your thoughts on
Sure.
like current sort of status of some of these things
Yeah. I mean,
over the last 12 months.
the frustrating thing about nuclear is like you'll talk to somebody and you're like, do you like cheap energy? And they're like, yes. I'm like, do you like reliable energy? And they're like, yes. I'm like, do you like low emission energy? And they're like, yes. I'm like, well, nuclear. And they say no.
No.
And you want to pull your hair out. I understand that the HBO special on Chernobyl was cool. Like it was pretty cool. But Microsoft's deal with 3 Mile Island should be a clear indicator that everything for the most part is cool, right? And while there are some concerns, whether it's like, how do we secure these things or how do you take care of the waste? I've spoken, to several nuclear scientists and several people, frankly, in the Navy,
Oh,
right? naval submarine commanders where they have a nuclear reactor in a boat, like couple hundred
Under the
feet
sea.
underwater, like they're not going anywhere. And when they come out, they don't have like ooze dripping from their ears. Like everything is good, right? They may crush a lot of heaters, right? The Marlboro Reds, which aren't healthy, but like these guys are pretty smart and they have it. So nuclear, in my opinion, is a military technology, right? If the military is great at a variety of things, but their technologies are bad ass, right? And so how it hasn't scaled from there is a travesty, right? We should figure that out. Um, do I think it's getting any better? It's probably the same spot as it
Yeah.
is in the last 12 months. Like, and
Okay.
that's unfortunate and stupid. Geothermal, look, I had the benefit. It was awesome. I got to go to Baker Hughes annual conference in Florence. And they somehow let me do like all these interviews for my own podcast. And, I talked to like 4 or 5 geothermal guys, and the way that they explained it made it sound so amazing. And then there's a guy that you should actually talk to in California, right outside Kern County. His name's Mike Umbro, ex-investment banker, very, well-known geothermal advocate. And it's just like, man, break this down for me. And what's fascinating about the technology now, both what I've learned from just conversations, is you could retrofit existing abandoned oil and gas wells with geothermal technology. And so the fact that California in particular, where there are a lot of abandoned wells, but they also like their interesting, regulatory stance on oil and gas, like take the abandoned wells, just retrofit them with geothermal, boom, like problem solved. And there's a hesitancy there and they move slow and they're bureaucratic, and that's irritating. I actually think that if we play our cards right, geothermal in certain regions of the United States will make up an increasing or a significant percentage of the energy mix. Nuclear, like once again, I love nuclear, but I remain bearish on it because from a policy standpoint, we just can't get out of our own way. And like, look, to be fair, when you're scaling transmission and distribution, that's a really hard topic and like a lot of delicacies and a variety of complexities to address. And you probably solve one problem only to create another. So what is the balance? But SMRs continue to be really, really cool. So I'm hoping that we can figure out how to scale nuclear quick because, if history teaches us anything, nuclear takes a really long time to come online.
Yeah. And I was going to say, like, it feels like when you compare geothermal and nuclear, at least when I think about it as well, like in my mind, geothermal is sort of similar where we could bring on wells at a time, which from a capital potential is much more manageable, whereas as nuclear is an entire facility. And so like, I feel like as well, like just that the ability to build geothermal is a lot faster, particularly again, like to your point around permitting reform, which I feel like I've heard a lot about permitting reform, both here in Colorado, talking to folks, but also with the federal stuff as well. Like it's a huge challenge. And so like that to me feels like it's where geothermal is going to have that advantage because it can be sort of, we've learned a lot in terms of permitting of wells and what that looks like. Anyway.
The analogy that I make is like, there's a couple shows on Netflix that I really like watching with my boys. It's like, and there's like 4 or 5 of them. It's like these guys and they'll go from like junkyard to junkyard, finding like these classic cars that, in the day were just amazing, right? Mustangs, Camaros, trucks, the works. But they've sat in the junkyard for 30, 40 years and they're beat up and they need work. And these guys bring it to the shop, they do their thing, and then, they'll sell these, souped up cars for, 10 times what they bought it for. That's geothermal. Like the old wells are like the analogy to the beat up car. Like we have the stuff in place. It just needs a little tender love and care and some expertise to like soup it up according to modern day standards. And so, there's a variety of things that we could do with these abandoned wells that would also not only provide investor return, but alternative sources of energy, but also lower emissions because these wells are just leaking methane left and right. And so where I get irritated with, fossil fuel detractors or whoever it may be, where it's like, well, the companies need to pay for the abandoned wells. And I've said this multiple times. It's like, yeah, they should. But you know what? They're either bankrupt or dead or both.
Yeah.
So there is no money to do it. So we have to get creative, right, and innovative and use the capital markets, right, free market principles to say, like, this sucks, and whoever created is a jerk and they should be held accountable. But we could do two things at once. Go find them and sue them and do whatever you want. You take your time to do that. I'm going to go over here and figure out how to fix this well.
Yeah.
And I want to do it where I want to make a little bit of money because that's just how it works. Like, I'm not doing this stuff for free. I have better things to do with my time.
Yeah. Well, and the orphan well conversation, there's lots of conversations about that, but they're called orphans for a reason because they don't have a parent and they're now in the custody of the state. Like,
they're not called. Exactly.
Like, that's why they're called orphans, like,
that's
which is very sad.
Definition of
an orphan. So, so there is a huge problem, and there's, and there's lots of conversations about that issue, but it's a really good point around, like, how do we, because again, to think about an emission footprint as well, if we don't have to put new holes in the ground and we don't have to, have, yes, you'll need some new pipe where things have corroded, to your point, like new engine and all this kind of stuff. But like, if footprint and permitting and, this conversation that is happening in the general population around not in my backyard or the NIMBYism and stuff, if we can use and existing infrastructure, it helps with that conversation. It should help with that conversation. I don't know it always does, but it should.
So the emissions debate, right? And I'm lumping in like net zero, decarbonization, all this stuff. Like, I'm not going to say it's dumb. Like, it's not dumb. Like, but it is misguided, because the irony of this is if you allowed the capital markets to do what they do, to cook, right? If you really left them alone and allowed them to cook within the boundaries of the rules, right? I'm not saying anything crazy, like very specific guardrails. We would be decarbonizing much quicker, right? What has gotten in the way, in my opinion, is an overstep by the government, right? And the regulatory bodies. They want to be a participant, a player in this game, as opposed to a referee. And once again, the incentive structure is entirely screwed up, right? I don't think the route of penalty necessarily is the most effective. It should be in place, right? You just can't be going around doing what you want without, the risk of peril or penalty, whatever you want to call it. But like, I've used this joke multiple times, and it's not even a joke, but like, if Trump went to Exxon and said, if you figure out an energy source that is affordable, reliable, and has the lowest carbon emissions, and you can prove it beyond a doubt with, quantitatively, all that jazz, you never have to pay taxes again. What do you think they're going to do? Right?
Yeah.
They're gonna figure it out. And so, the irony of this is all the technological innovations that we're talking about, like this energy expansion, right? Putting more options in the portfolio, incorporating much more of a competitive dynamic with options, like, whether they're doing it on purpose or not. I don't think the idea is, well, let's just focus on stuff that decarbonizes. I think it's the idea of, like, how do we make this much more efficient across the board? Those are the low emissions technologies, right? Those are geothermal, like no emissions, nuclear, almost no emissions. I'll probably throw batteries in there, but I think there's a footprint there because of like the rare earth minerals mining. So if you really want to be a stickler, it's not really net zero. It's not really low emissions.
We can, you start looking at life cycle, you could put that argument for anything, right? Like,
right,
there's
exactly.
still pipe
like,
that goes into geothermal wells, like
diesel
all this
machinery.
kind of
stuff. But in any case, like,
I know what you
I
mean.
think there's this whole industrial complex that has been created on emissions that has ironically gotten in the way of decarbonizing stuff. Because if you look at how investment and entrepreneurial spirit and just innovative focus has evolved over the last 20 years, like, in most cases, the top of the list is nuclear, geothermal, and natural gas, all decarbonizing agents within any given economy. And oh, by the way, like, one of the things that I think we do a terrible job in the States, and predominantly on the coasts or in like the upper middle class or elitist circles, is like, we need to decarbonize. You're like, dude, we are like 10, 15% of emissions. We have Africa, we have the Middle East, we have APAC, we predominantly Southeast Asia. All these companies are scrolling on TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, being like, you know what's awesome? Air conditioning. You know what's awesome? Like, getting paid more. You know, it's awesome, like a higher standard of living. Like they're going to have unprecedented electricity demand as well. And they're going to say, well, what do we want? Do we want decarbonization or do we want really cool stuff?
Yeah.
They're going to say, I want really cool stuff. Like AC is awesome. Like we
Yeah.
had, dude, we had some Europeans visit. Like we met these Europeans and they thought that we were magicians because we have air conditioning. They thought they're like, they could not get over the fact, and they go back like, I would love air conditioning. Like, and that's just human nature.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not necessarily just figure out these technologies for the sake of decarbonization. I think
Yeah.
that's short-sighted and kind of dumb. It's all these other players, all these developing economies are going to be like, I want that. And if we could facilitate the geothermal and the nuclear, like you kill a lot of birds with that one stone.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my
It's
preach for the bowl.
I love it. Although you know, to be careful about talking about killing birds, then all the wind people get mad. But
Yeah, that's fine.
but I know what you mean. No, it's a really interesting conversation. And I think, you know, the framing of this, and I've talked about this a lot, but like, you know, we see the butting heads of particularly the oil and gas industry and the climate industry, you know,
Yeah,
instead of working together. And again, it's the framing around what, you know, what we're trying to do, right? It's like,
yeah,
how do we, and if we can all try and figure out how to come together in terms of the framing of the outcome instead of just,
yeah.
you know, I feel
Well,
like often from the environmental side, it's we want to stop fossil fuels. It's like, well, or do you want to, you know, and whereas it's like if we all just talked about reducing emissions, it's a different
yeah,
conversation. And
I
so
don't
it's
know. I mean, like,
framing around some of that is I think really important. But
I'm
yeah,
so sorry to cut you off,
no,
like, but
yeah,
this
jump in.
such a and I once again unsolicited gratuitous plug. I talk about this in
In
the
your book,
book.
I assume. Yeah, I'm excited to
Um,
see it when it comes out later this year.
it goes back to the incentive structures, right?
Yeah,
You know, emissions became a thing for the oil and gas community when investors said this is a thing. Now there was some kicking and screaming, no doubt, but it was kicking and screaming and being like, all right, we have to do this, right? There is an incentive to satisfy and fulfill the needs, even if you think they're stupid, of your investors. And there's obviously the boundaries of like pragmatism. At some point, you're just like, no. But generally speaking, like when you look on a chart, like when did emissions like really begin dropping? It's when investors really begin asking. Um, there are great people on the environmental NGO side. Like I get along with a lot of them. I think they're good people. I also think it takes a certain personality to work for like a nonprofit or an NGO. And I do respect that. But but the incentive structure with environmentally NGOs is predominantly centered on fundraising, meaning they have to continually strike an emotional chord in order to get more money, right? The accountability infrastructure and the incentive structures associated with an environmental NGO is predominantly centered on fundraising. They don't have to earn or return. They have to satisfy the people that give them money, which gave them money in the first place because some sort of emotional chord was struck.
that's true.
So they will continue to hamper down in most cases on this morality aspect. When I'm not saying you discount morality in the general, that's why we have
Yeah,
governance.
but I know
Um,
what you mean. Like it frames the conversation differently just
totally frames
by
it
the
different.
way, but by the way that they are structured in terms of, you know, their day to
Yeah,
day.
like I mean,
Makes
the
sense.
coal, the natural gas is the perfect example. It's like, well, we want to get rid of fossil fuels. And you're like, dude, have you been to like rural America, like those big white jugs in somebody's backyard? Like, dude, that's propane, right? If you look at
Mhm.
Southeast Asia, for example, like the vast majority of their economies require propane and butane. If you look at the derivatives of the NGL market, right, it's really responsible for a variety of med devices. Like the innovations that we have in med tech don't even happen if we don't have NGLs, like natural gas liquids. Like you just don't have that market. Ukraine, even if you want to get into like the war scenario, like whether it's LNG or, you know, like I said, in other areas of the world, third world where it's just starting small with propane or the butane, like where the hell do you think that stuff comes from?
Yeah.
It comes from us, right? So you can't just blanket these like no fossil fuels. It's like and it's sort of cliche at this point, but I do think like the time has come to eliminate a lot of the unnecessary emotional triggers that are ironically making us go further or diverge us further
Pushing.
from what functional solutions can actually be.
Yeah. No, it's a really good reminder for everyone. So as which is awesome. Dan, this has been so good. I'm curious, like, as we kind of like wrap up and things like that, like what else, I'm curious what else is always on your radar, right? Like you're always kind of talking to interesting people and out
Yeah.
there, out and about and stuff. Like, is there anything that we haven't touched on that
Yeah. I
people
mean,
should be
there's
looking
a
out
few
for?
things like, and once again, eh, people are going to probably chase me down the street with like knives and pitchforks and stuff. Um, I don't think the emissions debate is as intense as it is now in 5 years. Because I think the water debate,
Hmm.
man, there's some funky things going on with water where we're going to have some serious problems everywhere.
Yeah.
Like if we don't figure this out, like
My
we're,
like my apple trees have died for lack of water in my front yard. Like my trees don't even survive right now
it's, I
because there
mean,
is
look,
no water in the West. So,
there's the West is in bad shape. Like, and that's not, I just told people to stay away from the emotional triggers and
yeah.
there I go.
It's
But my
not, but
point,
it, to be honest, it's not an emotional trigger. It's a reality.
yeah,
Like I have been driving.
yeah,
I got back into Denver a week ago. I haven't been here this summer, and it's
yeah.
crazy. It
Yeah,
is
and like the joke, and I've
dry.
used it before, like living in Florida, we have hurricanes. Like when a hurricane comes through and just smokes any given area, people are like, okay. There's frustrations and I don't want to downplay it too much. But man, if we lose water, like if there's no running water, like day two, you have old man Withers on the front porch with the shotgun. Like
Yeah,
don't try it. And it's a real concern. But with everything going on with data centers, water management, reservoir management, water stewardship, like it's going to get dicey really, really quick. And no one's necessarily talking about it because emissions and this, jazz with net zero, which I do think is dead, thank God, is going to just be replaced. Um, and then, if you look at carbon credits, for example, like the fact that we don't have a working carbon credit market to me is just asinine. I get it. And in fairness, like data centers are all like speed to power because they have to be. Um, but I think from an innovative standpoint, and this is more of an aspirational thing down the market, I do envision some sort of voluntary exchange popping up. But what we aren't like, but what scares the crap out of me is like the water situation.
mm,
It's if you look at the data, you can just go like you can Google, US drought map, and it's like the most depressing thing you've ever seen.
yeah. No, it's and like again, sitting here in Denver today, it's insane.
Right.
Just seeing and like the whole West is the photos I've seen and stuff is
Mhm.
crazy. And I don't disagree, to be honest, in terms of the water debate. It is actually, given that we are obviously in an election cycle here in Colorado, the Colorado River Basin conversation around water
Yeah.
has been starting to pop up locally,
Okay.
which is good, right? Because we have to have these conversations and we're going to
Yeah.
have to figure it out. I don't know what the solution is on water, unfortunately.
I mean, the solution to
But yeah,
me, the solution is simple. It's like, I mean, once again, it goes back to the incentive structures. If you went to like, you know, 50 entrepreneurs and said, figure out water technologies, um, and you came to them with the business model and all this other stuff, the same diligence, and you gave like the top five a grant money that came in the form of like maybe some upfront like VC capital, like it took
yeah,
the form of that, and you kept those entrepreneurs, you kept skin in the game with like, hey, if you blow this or we do an audit and finds that you just screwed off, like, I'm not saying like you give them the chair, but there's some pretty heavy punitive consequences associated with that. um let
yeah,
the best technology win. Like, I don't understand, and maybe they do it, but I don't understand why the government just doesn't have these constant competitive
mm,
like
like
bids
tech
where,
challenges and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
something
in
like that.
grade school, right? When you did the science fair, you're like, oh dude, I'm gonna build like a
Yeah,
badass science project, right? Like, or like robotics. And by the way, I never did
yeah,
it classes. I remember doing like science fair in fifth grade and I built like bridges, like you would have built like these bridges, and I got the
yep.
shit kicked out of me. My bridge sucked. Um,
Mine
but
didn't.
like
Mine didn't do very well either.
but
So,
like
which is probably why.
you had this massive participation.
Yep.
because you would get like sports tickets or you
Mm.
get like something awesome and you're like, yeah, like even if it sucks and I get smoked, I'm going to try to get it.
Yeah. Because
Like
there's the right
we should
incentive
have like
structure.
consistent competitions
Mm.
where like the winners get, something to make it worthwhile. And then you build these or you scale like these real cool technologies off of that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
That's,
love it. Well, it's Dan so much. I know we could just keep chatting and stuff, but
yeah,
I am
keep
going to
doing
let
that.
you, I am going to let you go. Lots for us to catch up on. I'm looking forward to next time I see you in person, and we'll have to catch up at the end of the year and talk about the
Sounds
book when
good.
it comes out. So
All
thanks for your
right.
time today, Dan.
Enjoy Denver. Talk soon.
Thanks. Bye.